Welcome back to the Crown Report. Josh Schaefer, Scott Burnside. Things are heating up in the Pacific Division home ice race between the Kings and the Oilers, and the Kings continue to play really well. Scott, how are you? It looks like you're in a new location since our last episode.
I've moved back to Georgia briefly, and as you well know, I'm packed. My bags are at the door, getting ready to head to LA and join up with you in person. And I'll be on hand for the stretch run all the way through the playoffs. I talked to Luke Robitaille for a piece I just put together on Nick Nixon, and we were joking. I said, Luke said, pack till June, and that's my plan. So we'll see. But I got the big bag packed by the door, so I'm looking forward to making my way west. But yes, I am in Georgia, in lovely downtown Decatur. Record-setting pollen here, so it'll be good to get to head to LA. So how are you doing? Did you look up Kreskin after our last episode?
I did, and I even saw somebody in the comments be like, wow, what a poll from Scott Burnside.
Was it so perfect? And I hope we talk, not to hijack the episode right off the get-go, but we could continue to talk about my prescience when it came to Andrei Kuzmenko, who, as we're taping this, coming off just such an impressive performance by Kuzmenko in a very important win over one of the best team in the Western Conference and a team that could end up winning the President's Trophy, the Winnipeg Jets. That was a fine hockey game, and Kuzmenko continues to impress. So, and you did hear it here first. So,
for somebody who hasn't been on this show yet, Zach Dooley does get mentioned a lot, and I will say, Zach had a tweet last night. Yep. As he should. Yeah, we could just actually talk about him this whole episode if you want. Zach had a tweet last night that I thought perfectly summed it up. And he said, from the start, there was not a moment in this game where the Kings did not feel in control. Yeah. And that's impressive because a hockey game is all momentum swings, right? I mean, it's back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So one little thing can completely change the course of the game. And from the drop of the puck, it seemed like the Kings were completely in control of what they're doing. And there have been moments this season where it hasn't felt like that. There have been games this season, even against Winnipeg. The Kings have won all three meetings with Winnipeg, who's got 106 points and leads the NHL. There have been moments in other games against the Jets this year where, in the third period in Edmonton, it's on the brain, I guess, in Winnipeg, in the first game of that long 5-game road trip in January, late in the third period, the Jets scored. And it kind of felt like, Kings have been in front all game. What's happening now? And now the Jets just tied it. You have those moments, and not once in that game last night did it feel like the Kings were not in control.
Yeah. Well, and again, to me, as we get closer and closer, 8 games left in the regular season, and you alluded to it off the top, the playoff positioning so important and so tight in the Pacific Division, especially as it relates to the Kings and Edmonton. To me, that's just the maturity that this team continues to show. And you look at the record since the trade deadline, and this is not we're not suggesting Andrei Kuzmenko making a late charge for the Hart Trophy, but listen, I think fans were not taken aback. I think fans in some segment of the fan base might have been disappointed, that the Kings didn't do what so many other teams did. Colorado, Dallas, Carolina, and then Dallas, making a big splash at the trade deadline and adding Andrei Kuzmenko from Philadelphia. And it took him 7 games without a point, and we talked about that, and that was when we suggested that he was playing well enough that things were going to happen. But since the trade deadline, Kings are first in goals allowed per game, their first 5-on-5 goal differential, their second in all situations goal differential, 4th in points percentage, and 6th in goals scored per game since the trade deadline. That speaks to me of a team that really is, they know their jobs, players have roles, the lines are established, the system is in place, and it's being adhered to. This is a team that is so confident. And again, you talked about it, Josh, and again, Zach's tweet was right on, right? And the confidence to play the best team in the NHL and not wilt, not take, not look out of sorts really for any part of that game. And I think that was really impressive. And we'll see what happens the last 8 games. So important what happens
Yeah.
between now and April 19th.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And before we move on from the Kings versus the Jets game, a stat that was sent to me last night by Blake Wary: if the Jets finish first in the West, it'll be the first time in franchise history that the Kings have swept the eventual number one seed in the West. That comes from the
Oh,
best statistician in the game, as far
wow.
as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So the Kings, 3 games against the Jets this year, they have given up 3 goals in total and have
Yeah.
outscored Winnipeg 10-3 in 4 games. So something
So
of
you're
note for the Kings this year.
saying
Hmm?
it's a good thing at Western Conference Final matchup then?
Yes, yes. So the Kings, of course, will see the Jets in the Western Conference Final. I don't know. That's every time we
Good
see
story.
somebody in the East. Yeah, every time I see somebody in the East that I know, last time we play them, the obvious, goodbye is see you in the
You in the
finals.
final. Yeah, I hear you.
So that's and everybody says the same thing, which I think is funny. Part of me at first was like, nah, I'm not going to say that. I don't want to jinx anything, but then I'm like, it's fun. Everybody says it, like, oh,
Yeah,
whatever.
that's
But
right.
it's possible. And the Kings and the Jets have matched up well this year, but it's just been the Kings that have pulled away every single time, which I think is interesting. A lot to get to in today's show, and obviously we can't be here forever. But one thing that I did kind of want to bring up, Scott, and I know that you were interested in this too. This isn't even necessarily, I think, Kings specific, but it's a situation in a recent Kings game that I think sparks the conversation, and that's the talking coaches' challenges and clarity, transparency when calls are reviewed and calls are made, because we see one the other night in a Kings game against Toronto, where it had appeared that Austin Matthews had played the puck with a high stick down to
Yeah,
himself and then scored the game tying goal. And from that point, the game spiraled out of control for the
yeah,
LA Kings. And we have
yeah,
not seen that happen very often,
yeah,
where after the review, first couple angles look like you don't see anything. And then it seems like there's a clear angle where he plays the puck above his shoulders, but they call a goal. Next night in Anaheim, exact same situation. Anaheim challenges the play and it gets reversed, and the goal for Toronto is taken off the board. So is it, one versus the other? It's just coincidentally Toronto both times for the Kings and against a Kings rival. But I think that kind of sparks the conversation. What did you want to bring up when it comes to this kind of transparency in coaches' challenges and reviews?
yeah. Well, there really isn't transparency, and I guess that's sort of the issue. And it's sort of like, I mean, in goaltender interference as a whole, that's a whole other thing, because it's not a lack of transparency; it's a lack of understanding, I think, as to what exactly is goaltender interference. So that's a whole other thing that I think the league needs to, I think they need to get their arms around it. You see the frustration on that around the NHL. I thought this was interesting, though. I was watching, and as soon as they, and you're right, took a couple different angles, hard to tell, and then the one angle that was from a lower, almost ice level. I
Yeah,
was shocked. Maybe I was the only person more shocked might have been Jim Hiller. I was shocked when they upheld the goal. I
yeah,
assumed it was coming off the board. And I guess it's just, and I don't know what the mechanism is. Do you have a pool reporter? Once again, Zach Dooley, I think he might have referenced this on Twitter, but yeah, and I've been in situations, the NHL doesn't do it very often. In fact, I'm trying to remember the last time I was in an arena where there was a pool reporter situation where someone went in and talked to the official about a specific call and they could explain it. Sometimes the league sends out a little release, and I don't seem to get those, so I don't know whether they do that anymore or not. But I guess it's self-evident, right? I mean, they looked at the angle, they felt that the angle showed them that the puck was played below the shoulder, and yet the angle seemed to indicate something completely different. And I guess it would be nice to be able to just even ask that question: Hey, what was the angle you saw? Walk us through how something that looked black was called white, or vice versa, and
yeah.
why did it happen that way? And I think that would be, it would help educate fans. People would know, if there was a mechanism to figure that out. And right now there doesn't really appear to be one. And that would be nice. It would be nice to be able to have somebody say or send out a video, here's the definitive angle. Now maybe the maybe the problem was it didn't have a definitive angle, in which case
Yeah.
Maybe it was the wrong call. But you're absolutely right. Though what is so critical about those kinds of situations is imagine that happening in a playoff game, because that changed everything. I thought the Kings were the better
Oh, yeah.
team, had better chances, could not find a way to create some separation with the Leafs. And you're absolutely right. From the moment that happened, and of course, when you make the challenge, you go shorthand. It just the Kings. It was pretty much not. I don't want to say it was over, but it was. It did change the course of that game, and it did, in my mind, change the outcome, and that's pretty serious stuff.
I think when you look at the two, and again, this for me isn't necessarily a Kings specific thing.
Yeah.
It just happened. That's why I think it's sparking the conversation. But the difference I think between the Kings game and the Anaheim game for Toronto is in the Anaheim game, I felt like they had more angles. In the Kings game, maybe they didn't. Now, the other thing too is I'm all in on post-game press conferences from the referees. I'm all in on it. But then the other thing too is I do think that there's an important place to have a former referee, former official, former linesman, anybody as the rules expert. I know the game the other night, I went and looked it up on TV, and I think it was Dave Jackson who was the rules expert, and I think his position is vital to that broadcast, right? And it's great to have. And of course, in the NFL or in college football, you've got guys like Dean Blandino, and like you've got the rules experts, the review experts, which I think is important. What I think is interesting though is this is my moment in the show where I'm going to talk about a different sport. I'm a huge soccer fan. I'm a huge Premier League fan, and there are a lot of problems with VAR, which is the video assistant referee. Yeah. But what they do, especially for offsides, which has caused a lot of flack, they've gotten a lot of hate for this, is they actually show the off-ice officials drawing the lines and figuring out when a guy is offside, and you get to see on TV what it looks like while they're doing it to determine, which has its own issues. Let's just be out front about that. But I'd be interested to see that in other sports too, especially hockey, because if you're looking at a guy who's offside, usually offside's pretty cut and dry, pretty black and white. But at the same time, it would be great to see what Toronto or what the referees are looking at on the iPad. It sends to TV and they're like, yeah, well, you can see this. Yeah, he's offside. Like, I think that'd be super interesting.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting during the playoffs is, of course, that there is a series supervisor. Usually it's a retired, usually a referee, but official who's with the series, talks to the coaches, and in theory, if you had something like that, then you could talk to the series supervisor after and say, my friend Dan O'Halloran, who's, was one of the great referees of his generation. He and I went to high school together in Essex, Ontario. And I'm pretty sure that Danny he will do some of that during the playoffs, but to be able to go to Dan O'Halloran or whoever it might be after a game and say, can you walk us through that? And again, listen, the officials they take a lot of heat. It's the hardest sport in the world to officiate. Yes, there video, I don't know whether it helps or hinders sometimes. It's a tough sport. I like how the NHL does it. As you get deeper in the playoffs, they're graded every day. Every day, those officials are getting emails with highlights of their calls, and who knows, maybe did that come up in the post the next day's email from Stephen Walcom in the officiating group? Maybe. But they do a terrific job under trying circumstances. But it would be nice to be able to have that kind of conversation, because I do think that it helps to educate the fans, the media, and it gives, we have more knowledge. We can speak more knowledgeably about the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that game too, when this happened, felt like a playoff game. Yes. We've got a few games in a row that have felt like playoff games. Yeah. We've got a few more that are upcoming that will most certainly feel like playoff games, because it will probably, it looks likely that it will be a first round playoff preview. The Kings and the Oilers play twice before the end of the regular season. One is at home, one is in Edmonton. I think it's safe to say that these are absolutely massive games that could dictate the way that things shake out in the Pacific Division playoff picture. But when you look at these two games, at least on paper, when you look at the calendar, Scott, what jumps out to you about these two games specifically between the Kings and the Oilers?
Yeah. Well, I was literally looking at it just before we started, so I feel now I have a better handle on things. And I don't want to go too far out on a limb, but I think the Kings have to win both those games, and in part because I don't know how the Oilers manage this. They have 3 games left with San Jose and 1 with Anaheim. With the whole due respect to the rest of the California NHL contingent, that's that's not that's not too hard to take for the Edmonton
Protest.
Oilers.
They also had one game against Vegas, which I saw going in, and I was like, "Oh, this looks pretty good." And then Vegas has an early 1-0 lead, and then the Oilers came back and won.
I
Like, that's
know it's
not
a big.
helpful either.
Well, no, not unless you still think that you might have a shot to get to first place in the Pacific. But 5 points, 8 games to go, and you also actually have to outpoint Vegas because they're likely going to have the regulation tiebreaker. So
Yes.
it was not helpful for the Kings to see that win. But the bottom line is the Oilers on paper are going to have an easier time. But of course, they don't have Connor McDavid right now, and his return still unknown. Leon Draisaitl, of course, back in the lineup and picking up where he left off. If I was voting, Hart Trophy #1 guy. So to drill down with both teams having 8 games left. Now the Oilers are in a similar position to the Kings vis-a-vis Vegas, in that they will have to likely outpoint the Kings because the Kings should have the tiebreaker. So in order for the Oilers to get home ice advantage, they'll have to finish ahead in points. They can't be tied. But I think really, the deal is you pretty much have to win both games. I think at the very least you have to split, but I think you have to probably win both games given the way the schedule lines up. And I think those are going to be great tests. Again, one at home, one on the road. The first one next Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, I believe. And I just like the idea of it, right? I think it is going to put a real sort of sharp focus for both these teams, knowing that it seems almost inevitable they are going to play again for the 4th straight year. And those 2 games are going to loom large. And I love the idea. I'm so excited that I'm going to be there for both of them. But I think it's going to be it's a great test for a Kings team that has answered a lot of questions against how they play and prepare for the best teams in the NHL. So I think that's going to be good. What do you think? Like, when you look at these 2 games, you don't want to get too hyped about it because if you lose both of them, and if you end up having to go to Edmonton to start the series, you got to play there anyway. So it's not life or death, but I do think it's important, especially given Kings establishing a new home record earlier this week and continuing to build on that with with terrific play.
My thing is, I'll tell you what I think could happen. How about that?
Okay.
I think the Kings can beat the Oilers at home as they've done before this season, as they've done with the Jets and the Wild and the Knights and the Capitals and the Panthers and the Lightning and the Stars and all these elite teams that come into Crypto.com Arena, and the Kings have these just incredibly convincing victories. I could see that. And then the thing for me is to not get overly excited about the prospects of the Kings going into the playoffs against Edmonton, because the whole thing for me is we just had that in January. Kings beat the Oilers at the end of December, go on the road to January. It's a great game, as I'm sure they all will be if they meet in the playoffs, and they probably will, and then feel that disappointment of potentially losing that one away game. So I think splitting those 2 games is very likely, and I think that at the very least the Kings need to do that because, again, like you said, the Oilers have some, I don't want to say easier opponents, but they have some teams towards the bottom of the standings remaining on their schedule. For the Kings, it's about 50-50 because you look at the April schedule. Kings just beat the #1 team in the league, the Winnipeg Jets. They've got 106 points. They're leading the race for the President's Trophy. Kings with their 3rd convincing win of the year over the Jets. But just on paper, you look at April, and every other game, it kind of changes. It's the Jets, and then a non-playoff team in Utah who still has some firepower, and then the Oilers, and then the Kraken and the Ducks, not in the playoff picture. And then the Avs, who I think are actually the best team in the league right now. And then the Oilers again, and then Seattle and Calgary. And Calgary's still in a playoff push too. I don't know if they will be by the time the Kings meet the Flames on Thursday the 17th for the final game of the regular season. But that is still absolutely going to be an important game for the Kings. So it kind of goes up and down. Like a team that you think you should beat versus a team where it's a toss-up. Like,
yeah.
So it's very, very interesting down the stretch with these final 8 games because it's hard to predict what could happen. And you have to be confident in the Kings at home, playing now 5 more home games and only 3 on the road. And they've been the best home team in the league all season.
Yeah. Oh, well, and I think that you raise an excellent point. Let's say you come up with a win against Edmonton next Saturday, or on this coming Saturday. To me, it's about maintaining that even keel no matter what happens. And I think we've seen, I think earlier in the season where, it took, if things went sideways, they went sideways for, a game or 2 or 3. There were longer periods of it. And I think certainly since the trade deadline, this is a team that has been able to arrest those kinds of wobbles. The wobbles don't lead to anything more serious. And that's why we're talking about a team that, is going to be north of 100 points. And they are right now, they control their own destiny and having home ice advantage in the first round of the playoffs. And, again, I think you go back to the start of the season and if you said this will be the situation with 8 games to go, oh my God, would you not take that? Not you'd say, yes, please bring that on. And I think that's the key through the last 8 games. Let's look at me. I'm going to say one of the cliches I always hate when a player or coach says this, but not too high, not too low, take care of business. And I really think that's got to be the message from the coaching staff is, we can get hyped up about the 2 games against Edmonton. Obviously the players understand what's at stake, but it's got to be kept in perspective. And I think this team's done a good job of that, especially since the trade deadline.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our next segment because we've got 2 more things we want to hit before we wrap up the show. One of them is a brand new segment. It is once again Scott Burnside themed. So instead of our Scott take this week, we've got buy it or burn it. So first off, we explain the rules. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you some scenarios. If you like it, you're buying it. If you don't like it, you're burning it because your last name's Burnside. Get it?
All right.
Okay.
That's it. I do get that.
Yes.
Just before the record, this is a tremendous idea, and it's not mine.
Thank you.
Which normally I would take full credit for all of it, but I just want you to know this is Josh's idea. It's a tremendous idea. I'm going to do my end to hold up my end of the bargain. Let's bring it on.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it. Okay. Buy it or burn it. The Kings currently have 3 20-goal players this season. Before the end of the year, they will finish the season with 6 20-goal scorers. Are you buying it or burning it?
Yeah, I'm gonna stretch this out for just 1 second here while I just take a quick look.
He's Googling the stats.
I'm not, I don't want to. Well, yes, I'm gonna buy it because we know Anze Kopitar and Quinton Byfield are gonna get there. They're both at 19. Can Trevor Moore get in 3 more? He's at 17 now. He's playing his best hockey of the season. So I'm gonna say. Yes. How many are we up to now? Does that give us 6?
That gives you 6. And then there's 1 more that's on the fringe too.
Yes, and that would be Laferriere at 16.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you asked me if it's going to be 6, right? And we're at 3 now.
I asked if it's going to be 6.
I'm going to buy that. So because 3 of those 4 guys are going to get there. Maybe on Laferriere, it's it's not out of the realm of possibility for him to get to 20 as well. But I'm going to buy 6. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not. Yeah. I think I would do the same thing. I think
it's a great one.
I am very confident. There's already obviously there's 3 that have already hit 20. Kempe's got 32, Fiala's got 28, Fogel's got 22. Yeah. Kopitar and Byfield I think are a shoo-in to get at least 1 more. For me, Laferriere is a player that if he gets hot would score in bunches, but it's been a little while for him. He hasn't scored very many goals recently. He's been great everywhere else. Trevor Moore, though, is where I'm most confident. I actually think with all due respect to Anze Kopitar and Quinton Byfield, if I had to pick one of those 3 to reach 20 goals, right now I'm taking Trevor Moore because of how good he's been as of late.
Wow. See, that would have been a good buy it or burn it. That's bold. But yeah, no, and you're right. And it's really, again, we talk about this, and it's so critical, this team's identity in terms of the depth scoring. But to see Trevor Moore playing with the kind of confidence that I think we saw, I think of last season, and it was sort of a breakout year for him, and I think we're seeing that Trevor Moore, over the last month or so, and that's so important to, again, needless to say, come playoff time.
Yeah. Next category, or next topic, I guess, buy it or burn it. The Pacific Division playoff picture will already be determined by the time the Kings face the Flames at home on April 17th. That's the final game of the regular season. Buy it or burn it. It will already be determined.
I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say burn it, because I think it could come down. Because I think the Kings. Let's say I'm going to predict Kings take 3 or 4 points from the Oilers. As we talked about, Oilers schedule, it's pretty good if you're an Oiler fan. I think it may take to that final night against Calgary. I'll even say this. I say that the Kings need 1 point against Calgary to secure home ice advantage. I'm buying that.
Okay.
But I'm burning the fact that it's going to be done. I think it takes all 82 to get the Kings home ice advantage.
I like that. All right. That's what I think is going to happen, just because of how the season has played out so far. I would not be surprised if, like you got to think about it. If the Kings beat Utah and they beat Edmonton and let's say the Kings win 3 in a row, or these upcoming stretch, Utah, Edmonton, and Seattle, and say the Oilers drop a couple games. I mean, it won't be determined, but it'll be very close. So, like, you could hypothetically, if results go one way or the other for Edmonton or for the Kings, and they both kind of go in one direction or the other, like, it could be determined by the time the Kings visit the Oilers on Monday the 14th. It could be. I don't think it will be, but it could be. So
what do you? Okay, and again, I'm not going to.
But you want an answer? I'm giving you a political answer. You want an answer?
I'm not going to dump on the Sharks, but Oilers play 3 times against the Sharks, once against Anaheim. There's 8 points. How many points I will tell you this: if the Oilers don't have 6 of 8 from those 4 games, that'll be a big disappointment for the Oilers. Yeah, it'll be a big disappointment for the Oilers,
even without Connor McDavid.
Even without Connor.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So, all right. Anyway. I say it comes down to the final game, as it did last year. But last year it was more where the Kings were going to finish, not necessarily the Oilers. The Kings won in overtime last game of the year. And
that was an insane. I had just arrived in Los Angeles, getting ready for the playoffs, and the Kings got up. They get up, or did they fall behind? And we were watching Vegas, because I think Vegas was losing to Anaheim. It was the most improbable ending to a regular season. I'm saying it won't. I think it'll be much more. It may come down to game 82, as I say. But I think the Kings will take care of business. There will not be that kind of crazy, zany ending to it. If I'm not mistaken, the Kings win in overtime, and the goal was scored between the time that we went from the press box to the dressing room area. Like, I think by the time we got off the elevator, you could hear people cheering, and we were like, how was that possible? So, and
it was off the face-off.
Yeah, it was.
Yep, I believe. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I don't think I am. I'm usually not. It was the fastest overtime goal in Kings history. Our producer Trevor Raybone confirms that it was 6 seconds in. I believe that's the fastest overtime goal in Kings history. I mean, he is. Yeah. I mean, the problem is when we're wrapping up a show and Trev sends me a stat that I missed. But yeah, I think ultimately it will come down to that final game as well. I've got one more for you.
All right.
Kings have 8 regular seasons left. This isn't even something based off of performance. This is a sheer numbers game, if he can get there. Darcy Kemper currently has 26 wins this season. He's 26-10-7. Does he eclipse 30 wins in the regular season before the season ends on April 17th? Turn it or burn it. He will. He will eclipse 30 wins. Turn it or burn it. Buy it or burn it. I forgot the name of my own game here. Buy it or burn it.
Burn it. It's Burnside's burning. See, here's my. It'll be interesting to see what Jim Hiller and the coaching staff do, because when you look at there's one set of back-to-backs. That's the game in Edmonton on the 14th, and they go the next night to Seattle against the Kraken. Like realistically, what's your use of Darcy Kuemper going to be, right? I mean, to me, this is always the balance, because you don't want to tax them, but you want them fresh and you don't want them rusty. So I'm going to say he needs 3 wins. I'm buying
4.
that. 4 wins.
4 wins. He's at 26 right now.
Yeah, because my guess is he's going to play 6 of 8. That's what I'm guessing. I'm going to say he plays 6 of 8, so that means you have to win 4 of 6. I'll buy that.
Yeah. See, my thing is, for me, it's not necessarily whether or not Darcy Kuemper is going to lead the Kings to wins. It's just how many games he plays. And the determining factor for me is I think that he is going to play that many games. And now David Rittich has to play. David Rittich has been reliable for the Kings this season. You look at what he did the other night against the Sharks too. He played 2 of 3 for the Kings. He played in Colorado, and then he played at home against San Jose, and Darcy Kuemper played the middle game against Toronto. So right. Rittich is going to play. He is absolutely going to play one of the 2 in the back-to-back at Edmonton and Seattle to end the year. And I would like to think that he's probably going to get one more game in there too. But Darcy Kemper's been hot. He's the Kings' number 1 right now. He has, as we both agreed in the past, thrust himself into the Vezina conversation at the very least. And he's played 44 games this season. I think you ride the hot hand the rest of the way. And that, for me, doesn't guarantee. In my mind, it guarantees at least 6 starts for Darcy Kuemper before the end of the regular season, and he needs 4 wins.
Yeah, I think
that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable, and I think again, who am I to speak for Darcy Kuemper or Jim Hiller and the coaching staff? But 6 of 8 is about right, I think, especially given that you only have one set of back-to-backs. You have the schedules is sort of spread out, and Darcy Kuemper wants to play, right? I mean, he loves to be in the net. And I don't think he's a guy that would be opting for rest down the stretch. I think he wants to play, and I would say, why not? Now, you get down to it. If going back to your earlier point, if the seeding is already established one way or the other, the Kings have locked up home ice advantage, or the Oilers have done so with, looking at those last 3 games, let's say, does that change how you view your usage? Do you give him an extra game off? I don't know. My guess is I'm with you. I think he plays 6 of 8, and I think he wins. I think he gets over the threshold. I'm buying it all day long.
4 wins. He's buying it. I'll buy it too. Scott, before we wrap up, we got one more quick segment. Now, in the past, a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation. I asked you who your most important player down the stretch was for the LA Kings. Do you remember who you said?
Yes, I did. I think I said Kevin Fiala, and then you took Darcy Kuemper, and
I did.
And yes, and it was a fine argument, or you did a very nice job of it. Not as good as I did.
Oh, thank you.
But
no, that's fair. I agree.
Yeah. But anyway, yes, I do remember it well.
So now our next topic of conversation before we wrap up in a few minutes is an under-the-radar player in the second half. And I don't even want to just say the second half of the season in general, but also these last couple of weeks. Who is an under-the-radar player, in your opinion, that the Kings either have going right now or need to get going as they continue this push for home ice in the playoffs?
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with Jordan Spence, who I have been so impressed with his play over the last couple of months, and it's been obviously since Drew Doughty came back, and with the addition of Andrei Kuzmenko, going with the 12 and 6, it's really to me it's really stabilized the back end. Like you just know every night, Joel Edmondson and Brant Clark are going to play together. That Mikey Anderson and Drew Doughty, they're 2 peas in a pod. And Vladislav Gavrikov and Jordan Spence, I think, have put in really yeoman work in that. I want to say the second pairing. That's sort of how we list them, even though it's those 6 guys are in a perfect world, they're probably playing within a minute or 2 of each other on most nights. But I think Jordan Spence's game, I think early on in the season, maybe some struggles, just there were some growing pains. He's still a young man. And I really like how he has played. I think he's much more confident with the puck. I like how he defends. I just think, and that pair is so important, when you think about, again, we talk about it, and you think about a first round playoff series against the Edmonton Oilers, it puts, when assuming Connor McDavid is back, puts a lot of pressure on your blue line core. Mistakes can be, the Edmonton's a lethal team. So I just think that pairing, and I think Jordan Spence in particular, has really matured. I like how his game has matured, and I think he's a really important piece to what the Kings are hoping to achieve, not just against the Oilers in the first round, but playing long into the spring and summer this year.
I like it. Jordan Spence, actually, I want to say he was asked a question by Carlin Bathe from FanDuel Sports Network yesterday or the day before at practice. And he said that one thing that he's been trying to do is just improving on the defensive aspects of his game, and that's what's most important. And he said the most LA Kings identity building thing I've ever heard. And he said, that's LA Kings hockey. Committing to the defensive side of your game and excelling that way is the way we want to play, and that's buying into Kings hockey. And I heard that, and I was like, yeah, I like it. That's what. Where's Jim Hiller? Because he would have loved that comment from Jordan Spence.
He loved that answer.
In that same vein, Scott. In that same vein, I'm going to also take a defenseman. I'm going to go somebody who I think has absolutely flown under the radar this year. Do you want to guess who I'm going to pick? There's a few other options, but of the main six that play a lot, there's only 5 other options.
That's true. Maybe Mikey Anderson? No?
Nope. I'm taking Joel Edmondson.
Oh, yes.
And the reason why is because when the Kings brought him in the offseason, he was a Stanley Cup champion. He was kind of that steady, no nonsense kind of blue line defenseman kind of guy. And he's been paired with Brandt Clarke for most of the season. And Clarke in his own right has had a roller coaster year, way more ups than downs, but has had some ups and downs. And the fact that he has been able to be paired with a veteran like Joel Edmondson, I think has been huge for him. And he's talked about that a few times, to the point where Clarke, in maybe not points wise, but in the way that he's playing, is, I think, peaking at the right time. But for Joel Edmondson too, I just feel like this guy shows up every game, is steady every single game, and half the time you don't notice him. And what I've gathered from talking with people like Jim Fox and Daryl Evans, as I have gotten into pro hockey these last 4 or 5 seasons or whatever, and so often seeing the young guys, the minor league guys, the prospects get their opportunities. When I've asked people their thoughts on these players, especially the defensemen when they go up, is they say, if you didn't notice him that much as a defenseman, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Especially for a young guy. Joel Edmondson is a veteran, and I think that he flies under the radar quite a bit. And you look at his last 10 games, he has a goal and 3 assists. He's not an offensive guy in his last 10 games. He's a +7 in his last 10 games. He's been good at home. He had an assist against Winnipeg the other night in his 600th NHL game. That tied a single-season career high in points for him. He's very quietly contributed offensively when he needs to. He's also got like the hardest shot on the team, probably.
Yeah.
And then also, I just think that he has been such a steady presence on the blue line where, hasn't made that many mistakes. Yeah. He hasn't made many flashy plays, but he's just a steady stay-at-home guy that I think has been huge for the Kings defensively this year. And for a guy that's played almost every game, except for the few when he missed a couple of games because of the birth of a child, which is a pretty gosh darn good reason to miss a few games.
Yep.
He's been such a huge contributor to the reason why the Kings have the number 2 defense in the league, and everybody's bought into that. But for a first-year guy to come into LA and contribute the way that he does, and then every once in a while, like every couple games, scores like a big goal or gets a big assist or something like that, I think it's been vital, and just a steady guy, and he's been really good for the Kings.
That's an excellent choice by you. Not as good as Jordan Spence, but very good nonetheless. Yes, but yes. And
I'm just playing catch up on the show, is what it is.
No, your points are excellent, and it's sometimes you look at what teams do and how they create a roster and why it's important. And, it's, we see teams talk about this every single year, adding experience at the trade deadline, having players who understand what it takes, right? I mean, and, obviously, Andre Kopitar and Drew Doughty, those are the guys, who tell the stories as they should for the dual cup wins in 12 and 14. Joel Edmondson has done it more recently. And, again, I just think his presence is so important, and it's only going to get more and more important when the games mean more. And when a guy like Grant Clark, when the season's hanging in the balance, he's, who do you want him on the ice with, ahead of Joel Edmondson? I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a perfect pairing, and he has been, in many ways, a perfect addition to this team. So good on you.
Thank you. And what's interesting to me too is, I mean, you look at that pairing by itself. You have Brant Clark, who is the opposite player of Joel Edmondson. They are two very opposites attract, I guess. But Brant Clark, I just talked to him about this yesterday. We had him on the pregame show. Last year, the Ontario Reign were really good. And at this point last year, Brant Clark was in the same situation, battling for home ice with the Ontario Reign. They end up having a great end of the regular season. They were unbelievable the second half of the year. They go on a long playoff run, which is so good for all the young guys. Yeah. Akil Thomas, Alex Turcotte, Brant Clark, these guys go on this deep playoff run, longest that the Reign have had since their first year in Ontario. And they lose to a rival in the Pacific Division Finals. It was gut-wrenching, and they went through this long, grueling playoff run and lost after being a good team all year. And then you have Joel Edmondson, where you mentioned his Stanley Cup. He was on a St. Louis Blues team that was done and dusted on January 1st. An afterthought, nobody gave him any credit. And suddenly, come June, they win the first Stanley Cup championship in franchise history. So you have these two guys that know what it takes to go almost all the way and lose and win. And I think that that's kind of a good kind of microcosm of what this team is there's a lot of guys who've gone the distance and lost, a lot of young guys who have had these deep playoff runs and lost, and a lot of these veterans that at least at one point in their career have made these runs and won. And Drew Doughty, Andre Kopitar, Trevor Lewis, Joel Edmondson, guys that have all won. Warren Foegele's kind of on the younger side, a guy that has gone the distance, 3 times recently, and last year lost. And then the guys who have been in the minor leagues have gone the distance and lost. So it's kind of a good group. And I think that they've got a really good mix, and we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point as well to have those experiences. and sometimes, I mean, again, the cliche, but sometimes you do have to lose before you can win. And, these, you do have a broad cross section of players who have had those experiences. Some have, enjoyed the ultimate high when it comes to hockey, and others who have had that crushing feeling of being this close and not being able to take the final step. So I do think that's important. And, how much it comes, how much is that borne out in how you play against a team like Edmonton or Vegas in the second round or whatever it is. You never know until you know, but I do think it can't hurt.
Well, we're in the final steps of the regular season. Next week on the next Crown Report, Scott and I are probably going to be in the same place, so that'll be fun.
It will be outstanding. Yes.
As we continue to follow the Kings' push for home ice in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Scott, safe travels. We'll see you soon. And Kings fans, thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon on another episode of the Crown Report.